Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bay Area Community Church. My name is Aaron. I'm one of our pastors, and I'm glad that you are joining us, whether you're here in the auditorium or in the chapel or online. Thanks for being here. And I was talking to some friends of mine recently who were expecting a kid, and I asked them what, feels like a natural question to me. I asked, hey, is it a boy or a girl, right? Seems like a reasonable question. And they replied, hey, we aren't finding out. We want to be surprised. And I was kind of taken aback. I'm like, wow, you're gonna wait until the baby is on the outside to find out whether it's a boy or girl? Like, that's crazy. Like, what a novel idea. And then it sort of dawns on me that, like, no. I think, in fact, that finding out the gender while the baby is still on the inside, that seems like the novel idea. We've only been doing that for like 13 seconds in human history. For the vast majority of time, for, all parents from time immemorial, the only way to find out was to wait until you could see the baby, right? And so it became obvious to me in that moment that my friends, they were not being novel. I was just being impatient when it came to my kids. Okay, that's really what it came down to. Because the truth is, everybody finds out at some point, right? It's just a question of when. For every parent, whether it's in the ultrasound room or at a gender reveal party or there like in the birthing unit, there is always a time when you find out, right? Like, there's a moment when you don't know, and then you cross a line when you do know. Okay, that process of not knowing and then knowing, that's finding out, right? That's the process of learning or discovering something, right? And I think in life, there are, of course, many positive examples of how we can find things out, right? A moment when you didn't know something, and then you do. You find out something amazing, like maybe he likes you, or she said yes, or you got into your top school, or you passed the exam, or you got the promotion, or the scans came back clear, right? All of those moments are moments of exuberance. You never want to go back to the world where you didn't know that this was true. And that's the effect that good news can have on our lives, right? You can't pay me to go back to the world where I didn't know this fact. But obviously, of course, as glorious as those moments can be, there is an equal and opposite reality as well. There are times when we don't know something, and then with a simple, refresh of a web page or a text or a phone call, or we open a letter, and we find out something that we wish we had never known. And you'd say, I would give anything to go back to the time when I didn't know this news. That crippling feeling, that's what bad news can do. And look, we've all been living through that reality for a long time now, I think, but especially of late, where good news, of course, can lift our spirits, can change our outlook on life, but bad news can crush our spirits or destroy our outlook on life. It's really that simple. And so today, I want us to wade into that reality a little bit and see if we can discover how the news about who Jesus is and what he's called us to do, how that news can transform us into the kind of people who can then bring life-changing good news, even in the midst of a firestorm of bad news. This year, our goal as a church family is to grow together in becoming good news, to becoming gospel people who show and share the good news of Jesus so that others might live. That's our goal, to become good news, to become gospel people who show and share the good news so that others might live. We've spent 2 years trying to keep our eyes on the prize of becoming more like Jesus, and in many ways, this year is just a variation on that same theme. Becoming more like Jesus involves doing as he did, of course, and he was a good news person. In fact, he was himself the good news. He brought the gospel, that word literally means good news, and Jesus is the one who brought the gospel that the kingdom of God was breaking in, that humans could have a relationship with God. And so we want to be like him. We are embarking on the journey as a church family. We want to become good news people in a world full of bad news. We want to faithfully live out the hope that we have because of what Jesus has done. And in order for us to start that journey, we thought it would be important to spend some time saturating ourselves in the good news itself. Before we can be good news people who are eager to show and share the good news of Jesus, it seems pretty important that we first of all know what the good news even is. And then second of all, it's important that we are personally transformed by this good news. So we're going to be spending 6 weeks just savoring, clarifying, saturating in, and enjoying the gospel so that we can become good news people. And we've sort of broken this down into 5 basic movements of the good news story. They look like this. The good news story starts off with the symptom. What's going on out there? What's going on out there? And then moves to the sickness. How did we get here? And then we have the solution. How does this get resolved? The proof is, how do I know that this is true? And then our response is, what do I do with this news? We've got the symptom, the sickness, the solution, the proof, and the response. And so as we're starting off in this good news story, it's almost as if for these first few weeks, it's like we're going to the doctor. And the very first step is with the doctor is going to be doing one of those like symptom logs. You ever had to do one of those where it's like, okay, we're going to figure this out. So you need to write down every single time you have a headache, and then everything you've eaten, every thought that you've had, every person you passed on the sidewalk, and you got to like write it all down for a little while and then bring that back, right? What's the symptoms? Like, what is actually going on? Only then, once you have that done, can you move on to a diagnosis that will explain the symptoms. And then only then, with a good diagnosis, can you get a course of treatment that's going to solve the problem, right? Hopefully that makes sense if we think about it in the medical realm. And really, that's what we're doing as we start this off. We're going to start with just dissecting what is the set of symptoms that we see. And so clearly, this is going to be an unfolding story as we go over the good news. And so if it feels like this week and the first couple weeks end without resolution, it's because we're not done yet. This is just step 1, and we're going to piece it all together as we go. Again, we want to be good news people in a world full of bad news. And I'm convinced that there's actually a counterintuitive first step that we have to take in order to begin this journey. Perhaps, again, the most important first step to being a good news person is to come to grips with the fact that the world around us is in fact full of bad news. The world around us is full of bad news. The first chapter in the good news story is the symptom. In the medical analogy, unless we acknowledge that we have the headaches, there's no way we can get to a solution. The same goes with the gospel. Before we can embrace anything that even resembles good news, we need to face the music. The world is full of bad news. It's crazy out there. It's crazy out there. And it's crazy at a personal level, right? Maybe for you, you've experienced these symptoms in the form of divorce, relational brokenness of any kind. People experience abuse of all kinds at a personal level. Of course, many experience financial hardships, whether it's just the grind of trying to pay the bills or the fear of losing your house. Of course, people lose their jobs. Kids are struggling in school. Could be academically, could be socially. Then there's the life-changing pain that comes from a diagnosis or a prolonged struggle with mental health. There's so much bad news that we can experience at the personal level. But it's also, of course, crazy at the level of our nation as well. In just the last few years, the headlines abound. We've moved through a pandemic, seen the effects of generational poverty and homelessness, watched the fallouts from failing schools. Human dignity is somehow constantly up for debate and on the ballot in various forms. There's deep political division in our country. You've already mentioned it this morning, but we don't have to look any further than the assassination of Charlie Kirk 11 days ago. He was a highly influential political force, public with his faith, made it a practice to wade into the most controversial issues of our day, and yet the culture of our country, of course, is at such a fever pitch that he was killed for that practice. And the varied responses to his murder are just a perfect microcosm of how divided and confused we are as a country. We live in a country full of bad news. But of course, it's not just the U.S., it's crazy at a global scale as well. There's numerous bloody civil wars going on right now. Food scarcity remains a problem for whole sections of the globe. Child soldiers are forced to carry out malicious vendettas. There's increasing uncertainty about the role of AI as our world moves forward. There are hurricanes and floods and heat waves. And I think we can all resonate with the feeling that something's not right. Right? Something is not right. And more than it's not right, we feel that something is actually terribly wrong. The closer we look at the world around us, the more it feels like it's spinning out of control. And actually can feel like the pace of deterioration is getting quicker and quicker. And as time goes on and our media sources are flooding the zone with all this bad news, we know to be true that something's not right. Something's not right. It kind of reminds me, actually, in sort of a silly way, of this guitar we have set up here. This guitar isn't doing so good, okay? You don't have to be a luthier, like a guitar maker. You don't have to be one of those to know that, like, something's not right here with this guitar. In fact, it gets a little worse when you take out the duct tape. Like, I don't think that's supposed to be. I'm not, like, great at guitar, but it's just not looking right here, right? I think we can understand that this is not operating according to how it's supposed to operate, right? I don't need to talk about what my boys did to it to agree. Something's not right. You don't have to be a professional to look at this thing and say, I don't know that it matters, actually, how I put it back. It's this broken. That can't do what guitars do. We can clearly know there's a serious problem. It doesn't take an expert. And when we look at the world around us, it doesn't take a sociological expert. It doesn't take a meta-analysis of all the available data to conclude the world is not as it ought to be. And I'm personally so thankful that in the midst of the chaos of life, we have God's Word as a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. Right? I'm so thankful. And what I love about God's Word, one of the many things, is it gives a powerful witness actually to this very aspect of human experience. The Scriptures don't in any way shy away from the fact that the world is very messed up. In fact, the Scriptures directly square up with and face the bad news reality of the world that we live in. Paul, in Romans chapter 8, says this in verse 22. He says, "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." The whole creation, everything, plant and animal life, all of humanity is groaning together. It probably should go without saying this, but like the sound of groaning is not a good sound, right? It's translated elsewhere as wailing or lamenting. It's the sound of pain and of anguish. And I love that here it is properly translated that it is groaning together, because the word itself is something that's meant, clearly, it's something that's done as a group. There's actually a version of this word that is what an individual would do, an individual wailing. But this word inherently means it's wailing together. It's like a choir of pain, a pain choir. That's what all of creation is, together. And he uses the metaphor of childbirth, which I will refrain from commenting on how hard it is, but I have been told that it's very painful, right? And this has been going on, he says, until now. And by this, he doesn't mean that it has stopped, like creation was groaning until now and now it has stopped. No, it means like from the very beginning and until this very moment and continuing indefinitely on, the world is collectively wailing in the immense continuous pain from the fall of man until today. That's the message he's conveying. The world, all of creation, groans together. And we might agree with this and say like, yeah, I agree. My news feed says that it is crazy out there. But you might feel, or some of us might feel, insulated somehow from the chaos, maybe living on a perch, a little bit removed, living in our own relative peace and stability. But Paul continues on, and he makes it clear that, no, we are not immune. We are actually part of the wailing as well. We are all in this pain choir. This is not just an out there issue. The groaning frustration is for us as well. Verse 23, he says, and not only the creation is groaning, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. He's saying we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, in other words, even those who are followers of Jesus, who have hope of a life beyond this life, who have the Spirit of God residing within us, we're groaning too. We're eagerly awaiting the day that Jesus comes and makes all things right, but in the meantime, we are not exempt from the problems of life. You don't get to leave the chorus of pain just because you have the Spirit. No, we're all struggling. But what is this struggle? What does this frustration look like in everyday life? Well, earlier in this letter, Paul had given an example of what it looks like. What it looks like when we're living in this frustrating cycle of being a broken person in a broken world. And the example that he gives, to me, it's just so relatable. He discusses what it's like to be seemingly unable to stop doing things that you know are wrong. Has anybody ever had that? Right? Romans chapter 7, 21 through 24, he says this, so I find it to be a law. This is the rule, that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law, waging war against the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Have you been there? When you know full well that if I type this comment, if I take this action, if I build this habit, I will hurt myself, I will hurt others, I will dishonor God, but we do it anyway. That's life in a broken world. And he does something amazing, I think, by acknowledging this reality. What he does is remind us that it's not just other people. It's not just those type of people. It's not just them from the other side of the aisle. It's not just those. They are not the only reason that there are issues in the world. No, we, all of us, we are adding continually new verses to the song that the choir of pain must sing. As we do the wrong things we know are wrong over and over and over, even though we know better. We're adding to the complicated, messy, painful, frustrating reality of life on the planet. What's my point? My point is this. We live in a world full of bad news, and something's not right. It's bad out there. It's bad in here. It can feel like the enemy, that evil itself is lurking at the doorstep, whether for you individually or as a nation or even in a global sense. So what are we supposed to do? What can we bring? What kind of good news could we bring to a world full of this much bad news? Well, earlier I mentioned that I think it's vital as a first baby step in our development that we embrace the fact. We have to embrace it that our world is broken and messy and hurting. There's no hiding from it. There's no need to excuse it. And why is it so important to be able to embrace this fact? Well, I think it's because too often, I've felt this pull, Christians have felt that in order to really embrace the gospel of Jesus personally, or in order to show conviction in a conversation with a non-believer, that we have to rush to the part where Jesus saves the day. And any time that we spend wallowing or reflecting on or venting about how not fixed the world around us feels, anytime we spend doing that must be like an insult or a cheapening of the good news of the great victory of Jesus. And I understand that instinct, but I ultimately think it's wrong. And more than that, I think that we lose credibility in the culture around us, and even in our own sense of, intellectual continuity in our own minds, if we seem to ignore or belittle the suffering and the brokenness around us because we're too quick to jump to the fact that Jesus can save it all, we lose credibility if we don't acknowledge reality first. Here's what I mean by this. Imagine a person is wrestling with this very common, powerful question. If God is all good and he is all powerful, then why is there evil in the world? That's sometimes called the problem of evil. And it is a compelling, important question. Maybe you don't have to imagine someone asking this because you're currently asking it. Maybe you've even been a believer for a long time and it still haunts you. That's perfectly normal. Certainly if you're not a Christian, a follower of Jesus, then you might be asking this question or have somebody asking it of you. It's a common thing. It's called the problem of evil. How should a follower of Jesus respond to this very challenging question? Well, imagine with me again that instead of taking time to understand a person who's asking this question and what maybe personal experience of pain might be driving someone to be haunted by this question, what if someone were to immediately jump in with an answer like, yeah, bad stuff happens, right, but Jesus has promised to make all things new. He's coming back to fix it all, so it'll be fine, you're fine. That answer technically resembles some aspects of a correct answer. But it doesn't seem to take the question or the questioner very seriously, does it? But by minimizing the pain in an effort to focus on the solution, we could inadvertently drive someone away from the very thing that could be the solution to their problem. It's like the doctor who knows that you need shoulder surgery, but their very dismissive bedside manner makes you reject their advice, like, I'm going to deal with the pain and get the cortisone shot, right? Because you're a jerk. So I want to suggest a different approach. I think it's important that we acknowledge and own the symptoms as an important first step. The approach I'm going to recommend as we think through and handle the tension that brokenness in the world provides for us, the people who are supposed to be good news people, here's what I think we need to do, what I would suggest. There are, of course, very good, very sound, philosophical arguments that we could make, that we should make, that we can make. Lots of, historical backing and robust logic that we could use to answer the question of the problem of evil. But I will admit, it's a rare person who needs that kind of information at step one when they're asking the question. When they're addressing the brokenness of the world, we don't usually need to go right to the philosophy lecture. That could be maybe steps 2 through 100, but I'm going to recommend a different step 1. Here's my recommendation. When you or someone that you know is struggling with whatever headline or whatever personal experience is reminding them of the bad news world that we live in, and they're wondering, how could God play into this craziness? I would recommend that we simply say, I actually wholeheartedly agree with you in what you're getting at. I agree with you. This is not how it was meant to be. This headline, this event, this tragedy, it's just not right. People should not have to have something like this happen to them or to you. I agree. Something's not right. Why am I recommending this as the first step? And what in the world does it have to do with the bigger story of the good news of Jesus? I'm recommending saying this because I think that in saying it, it automatically validates everyone's intuitive sense of what we actually see in real life in the world. We're signaling a point of agreement with every human around us, including our skeptical culture. And here's why this is so powerful as the first step in embracing the good news. Because interestingly, the fact that we all agree that something's not right is actually evidence that something bigger is going on. Maybe you've never thought about it this way, but the mere fact that we can all agree that it's not good that children are starving, or that people are assassinated, or that injustice exists, that fact actually implicitly assumes that there is something in the universe that is good, and that's how it ought to be. If you say to yourself, this is not how it's supposed to be, you're assuming, perhaps without realizing it, that there is a way that it should be. That there is a way it ought to be. In fact, it reminds me of this guitar. We can all agree that something is very unright about this guitar. And why is it? Why is it that we can agree that something's not right? Again, it's not because of our extensive training in the manufacture of guitars. Now, some of you, again, might work at Paul Reed Smith, and so you actually do know something about the manufacture of guitars. I'm not one of those people. My guitar's in the shop right now because I couldn't fix it, not this guitar. Why do I have so many guitars that are broken? Anyway, why can we agree that something's not right? It's because we've all seen a guitar before. So we know what they look like. And they don't look like this. And they don't sound like this either, right? We know that in the hands of the right person, these same component parts could produce something beautiful. Not in my hands, but in somebody's, right? They could make something nice. We've seen a guitar. We know what it ought to be. And so when we see it as something other than what it ought to be, by going, that's not right, we're actually agreeing together, aren't guitars a good thing? Isn't it nice when someone plays that well? Doesn't this dysfunction, we're saying, doesn't it imply that there's actually a different design? The brokenness implies a form of wholeness. When it comes to us as Christians who are being good news people, we need to understand this reality. The dysfunction points to a design. In fact, the verses that we read earlier in the scriptures, they make this same assumption. It says that creation is groaning because creation ought to be a way other than how it is. And so when we are trying to become good news people, it might seem as if the craziness or the brokenness of the world around us would be a barrier to us sharing the gospel. Why? Well, because, of course, the moment we start thinking of a loving God who has a wonderful plan for your life and Jesus can save you from all of your sins, we and everyone we know can immediately point to personal examples of how this supposedly good God must have been asleep at the wheel when this particular thing happened to me or our country or our world. The bad news seems to undermine the power and the relevance of the good news. But what if, as we see the bad news pour in, what if we could just pause and acknowledge that the fact that everyone around us would agree something is wrong, that's not a barrier to belief. It's actually a place of profound common ground. It's a place of profound common ground. It might be the one thing everyone agrees with. Something's not right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And instead of thinking this should put us on the defensive about the good news, I think we should see this agreement as an opportunity to ask this question. The question would be, hey, doesn't our deep discomfort with dysfunction, everyone, doesn't all of our collective deep discomfort with dysfunction, doesn't that imply that we were designed for something more? Doesn't our discomfort with the status quo imply we are designed for something more? When we see a broken guitar, doesn't it imply that there's a way it could be better? Is it possible that dysfunction and brokenness in our world is just a symptom that we're out of alignment with our original design? I think for too long, followers of Jesus have seen a broken world and assumed that it was something we had to wish away, something we had to fix, something we had to provide a trite answer for. But we live in a world where it's increasingly impossible to ignore or downplay brokenness. And it is perhaps the fastest way to ensure that no one, including ourselves, will take us seriously when we ignore reality. So my recommendation is that the first step in understanding the story of the good news is to fully embrace, to recognize the reality of the bad news world we live in, and to realize that the unanimous feeling that something is horribly wrong is a chance to ask, doesn't our deep discomfort with dysfunction imply that we are designed for something more? Let me just offer 3 things I think we can do as we try to embrace this first chapter in the story of the gospel. Here's our invitation. I think we can do these 3 things. First, I want us to run to the common ground. Something's not right. as we embrace the good news, we can run to the common ground that something's not right. There's not a single example of the groaning of creation that a Christian can't nod along with and say, yeah, I agree. That's not how it's supposed to be. We should not feel any compulsion to rationalize or downplay or explain away any of the starkest, ugliest, worst of bad news, even the bad news generated from people wearing the label of follower of Christ. We don't have to ignore any of it. We can agree something's not right. Run to the common ground. Secondly, we can sit in the discomfort. We can sit in the discomfort because lament isn't hopelessness. Lament isn't hopelessness. We don't have to rush out of the uncomfortable reality of a sinful world. In fact, again, I think it's important that we don't rush out. Whether we're talking about our own personal points of pain or the pain of the people around us that we know and love, before we move on, we need to do as the scriptures do, which is mourn the brokenness. There's, I think, a growing awareness that American Christians in particular, we struggle with. We have an underdeveloped sense of comfort when it comes to lament. We are an industrious, problem-solving, solutions-oriented people, and we want our solutions yesterday, right? So we need to grow more comfortable with not running away from the problems and the pain of the world around us. We need to grow more comfortable with, quite literally, sitting in silence with those who are pouring out their anger or hurt or frustration or confusion and not offering quick solutions. To simply weep with those who weep. The scriptures are replete with examples of how to do this. Perhaps the Psalms are the most obvious place. There are dozens of psalms of lament that express lament and mourning to God. Here's some examples. Psalm 13, 1-2 says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" Here's another one, Psalm 31, 11 and 12. "Because of all my adversaries, I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I've been forgotten like one who's dead. I've become like a broken vessel." Psalm 44. "Awake. Why are you sleeping, O Lord? Rouse yourself. Don't reject us forever. Why are you hiding your face? Why do you forget our affliction and our oppression? Our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our belly clings to the ground. I ask you, do these sound like trite prayers? Do they sound to you like vague requests about minor issues, about the bumps of life? No. This is not a person moving quickly on, slapping a prayer band-aid on their hurts, and then sending someone on their way. This is genuine wrestling, and that's okay. In fact, it's not just okay, it's good. And if you're here today and you feel like the circumstances or the heaviness of the events of the world around you, again, whether that's globally, nationally, or even in your individual life, if you feel the heaviness of those are a weight that you've been trying to carry and hold those things alone, maybe you came here today hoping for some kind of hope, some kind of relief. We would love to be of assistance to you. In fact, our elders would love a moment to pray with you. We've got a group of our elders who are available after this gathering who could perhaps pray a prayer of lament that could be a healing step with you, for you. So if you would like someone to pray with you after this gathering, I'd encourage you actually just stay in your seat. We're going to have a team ready to come find you to pray with you. You don't have to say anything, really. Just staying in your place where you are will be enough to indicate to them that you're a person in need of prayer. To come pray with you and to not offer an easy solution, but to enter into that brokenness with you. I'll admit that when it comes to lament in my own personal life, I think I'm like a lot of us, I'm not very good at this. I want to fix it, whatever it is. And we don't have time this morning for me to pretend as if I even could offer some full treatment of the issue of lament. I just want to recommend a book and some videos. These will be on our website next to this sermon video. If you go to our website to look up this sermon video, you'll find the resources there. One video that I think is actually really helpful is actually a guided video session that will walk you through a little bit about what lament is and then actually guide your prayer for a period of time. It's got beautiful imagery and some music that will lead you through and some comments that could just get you started on the journey of lament. What does it even feel like to build up some muscle memory of what a lament prayer could be? That video will be there. Or if you're a reader, I'd recommend the book Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy by Mark Vrogop. I've recommended it before. It's an excellent read if you want to get into the question of lament. It comes from a person with deep experience in pain. But my point is this, that no amount of bad news is too shocking or too powerful for the hope that we have. And so it's okay to sink all the way to the bottom of that doubt, that fear, and that pain. You don't have to rush to the resurrection. You can sit with the death. Lament isn't hopelessness. So then, finally, I want to say this. We can run to the common ground, sit in the pain, and then point to a deeper reality. The deeper reality that dysfunction implies design. We need to always remember for ourselves and for others that even when we don't have emotionally satisfying answers, which, by the way, we basically never do, what we can know is that our universal discomfort with the dysfunction and brokenness of our world implies that we were all designed for something more. And that fact alone can be the spark of hope that, if carefully nurtured, can turn into the flame of faith. And in the meantime, what can we do to learn to embrace the bad news as good news people? I'm praying we can run to the common ground, sit in the discomfort, and point to a deeper reality. As we close, what have we accomplished today? As I said in the beginning, I wanted us to simply identify the symptoms, right? We're in this 5 components of the good news story, and today was just a compiling a log sort of all the aches and pains, what other factors might be involved in causing our issues, so that we can have the follow-up diagnostic appointment. We'll get the results at a later date. For now, we just need to know the symptoms. What we've answered is, what's going on out there? Next week, we'll get to the source, and only then, with an accurate diagnosis, can we get to the process of healing. So I encourage you to join us next week and in the weeks to come for our follow-up appointment as we explore what is causing the symptoms we're experiencing. And I want to close with this, that there's a story involving Jesus in John chapter 11, where Jesus modeled everything that we've talked about today. His close personal friend had recently gotten a terminal diagnosis that resulted in his death. And Jesus, he doesn't rush to solve the problem. He doesn't rush to heal the issue. He doesn't even rush to resurrect his friend, something he was capable of doing, something he would eventually do. But that's not where he starts. What he does instead was something culturally humiliating. He goes to the grave of his friend and he weeps. Hot, angry tears in public. He weeps. Even though he knew how the story would end, how the story of history will end with him on the throne, with all of creation, new heavens and new earth, exalting him as the Lamb who was slain, who was worthy of all praise. He knew how this story would end. He knew how this individual story would end, with his friend coming forth from the tomb alive. He knew that, but he sat in the lament. He waited in the pain. He allowed himself to embrace the emotions that come with the fact that something in this moment is not right. And yes, he eventually provided the solution. Jesus is, of course, the ultimate solution. But in the meantime, he embraced the fact of the groaning of creation. He met people where they were, and he did not shy away from the harsh truth. And then, after being there, he moved forward into resurrection and hope. We, like Jesus, can sit in lament and receive the angst of doubt of those who experience the brokenness of our world, because we know that while Jesus wept in John 11, the truth is there's something else that he did that day. He declared this truth, that I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. We don't have to be afraid of sitting in the brokenness and the darkness of our world because we know without question that Jesus is the resurrection and anyone who believes in him will never truly die. So what's the story of good news? Well, the first part is simply this, that we live in a world of bad news. And sometimes the best thing we can do in the midst of tragedy is to do what Jesus did, to weep with those who weep. Let me pray. Lord, this is a time of heaviness for us individually, as a country, and even as a globe. There's so much to be concerned about. We're flooded with bad news. But we know that there is good news to be found in you. And I pray that we wouldn't skip past the actual realities of people's emotions or even our own emotions as we wrestle with who you are and what you've done and what's going on, the evil that's in our world. I pray that we wouldn't rush past that, but would embrace it, that we would weep with those who weep, as you did. Always aware of the fact that the dysfunction in our world is pointing to your great and perfect design and your desire to bring us into relationship with you. So I pray that there are those here today who are hurting and need prayer, that they would take the bold step to simply remain in their chair and receive prayer from the leaders of our church as we look forward to whatever spark of hope you might bring in the days to come. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week as we continue in the story.